Welcome to another edition of the Star Local Media Sports Podcast. My name is Matt Welch. I'm the sports editor with Star Local Media, and I am being joined by Devin Hassan, sports editor for the Mesquite News and Rowlett Lakeshore Times, as well as Brian Murphy, sports editor for our Frisco, Little Elm, and Salina papers. And gentlemen, just as we've done these past few Thursdays, let's answer a question. Let's have a little bit of a discussion. Let's pull an entry from our ongoing summer question series. We're going to discuss that for the first half of this podcast, and on the back end, we're going to take a little preview at State 7-on-7, which happens this week down in College Station. Give you a rundown on just some of the local flavor that we've got out at State 7-on-7. But as far as this week's entry from our question series, I wanted to focus on regions. You know, obviously with realignment, obviously everybody is fascinated to see what district you wind up in, but the regions are just as important as far as, especially when it gets to just kind of factoring in playoff runs and whatnot, because that's where everything starts. Everything starts, you got to get out of your region first before you can, get to the state tournament. And if you're just going to look at kind of the effect that, especially if you switch from one region to another, some regions are stronger than others, some, vary sport to sport. So basically the question is, what effect does region X have on district Y? So we'll just kind of touch on just a few of the regions that kind of, I guess, fall within our coverage area. We've got some representation quite a bit for Region 2 in Class 6A, especially between, you with Garland ISD and Mesquite ISD, you with Prosper, and me with Plano and Allen. We can look at a couple of the 5A regions as well. But let's start in, Region 2, 6A. Obviously, Devin, your schools have been entrenched in this region for quite some time. When you saw a bit of a revamped version of Region 2 and in Class 6A, what immediately kind of jumped out at you?
I think the competition level across the board certainly took a step up. We talked before, they got rid of that Woodlands district, that Conroe, Woodlands, Lufkin district, which certainly was good in a variety of sports, especially the Woodlands. And then the former 9-6A, Coppell is good across the board, Jesuit on the boys' side, they make the playoffs. But then you had the Richland schools, and you had a couple of Dallas schools. So you had, I'm not going to say a free pass, so to speak, but there were games that were not as tough across the board. Now you look at the new 9-6A with Allen and Prosper and the Plano schools and McKinney Boyd and Jesuit still remaining in Region 2, and you look across the board at 12-6A with the Killeen schools and Waco Midway, who's a tremendous all-around program, in Belton. I think those first and second round matchups got a lot more difficult. I don't think there's any layups, so to speak. Whereas sometimes, if you draw, just looking back at the last, say, Saxe softball playing Lake Highlands, it was 17-1 or something along those. There's not going to be those first round matchups anymore in any sport. And so I think that the Garland ISD schools and the Mesquite ISD schools are going to see a lot more competition in those first and second rounds. Because
that's where the first domino always falls in the by-district round. That can kind of set the path for a team as far as its playoff run goes. Because having covered District 6-6A for these past few years, that was always such a just such a storyline. Is that when you had 6-6A versus 5-6A, you were getting matchups in the first round between two teams that were ranked in the top 20 in the state polls, matchups that were third, fourth round designation, but because those two districts happened to be next to each other, you had a great team getting eliminated, in the very first round. And I think, at least kind of speaking from the PISD Allen point of view, I do think it's going to be a difference, going from having to play that murderer's row of a district with Louisville ISD and South Lake Carroll, one of maybe the most well-rounded district in the entire state. And then you get this, in turn now, PISD Allen, McKinney, they're going to be going up against the Garland ISD district plus Wiley. And, they've at least got an idea of what Wiley can bring to the table. And that there's going to be some consistency with Saxe and Rowlett. I believe between those two schools, only Saxe boys basketball was the only one that missed the playoffs last year. Yes. And that's what we've talked about before is the depth of that district. Saxe and Rowlett are what they are. Yeah. But when you get down to those third and fourth place teams, and you'll have other sports where you get some resistance from Garland ISD. Obviously, we know South Garland's boys basketball is going to be the end all be all in that region most likely, and then you have things like Wiley softball, which has made the playoffs for almost 25 consecutive years. So where where some of those strengths lie. But on balance, though, it is if your goal is simply just to fortify a spot past the first round, obviously, you'll take your chances against 10-6A versus, having to run into a team that might be ranked in the state's top 10 in just about every sport in 5-6A.
Yeah, Devin, I think you just angered a lot of people from Richardson and Garland. You're going to get a lot of emails.
Yeah, well, I'm just the results speak for themselves.
Yeah, they are. Yeah, that's.
Yeah. But just look at and taking it one step beyond though. Like, again, I mentioned the Killeen district, but 11-6A has good all around programs. The Rockwall schools are both very well rounded. In all sports, Tyler Lee, Longview have some very good programs, and the Mesquite schools. I mean, particularly Horn, these last couple of years has been able to make the playoffs in most of the sports they compete in. And Mesquite and North Mesquite tend to be trending up. They may still be, a lot of their programs may still be a year away, but they're still going to be competitive.
I think a school like Capel is an interesting case study for kind of how to gauge Region 2 because 2 years ago when Capel was realigned from Region 1 to Region 2, that was one of the big storylines coming out. Like, wow, what a draw for Capel. I mean, the Cowboys could be set up to do some special things, and on balance they finished 7th overall in the Lone Star Cup voting this past year. So you would just say on just sheer all around excellence, they still had a good year. But you look at just kind of what it was more just kind of a totality of they had programs that made some significant runs, but they had at least, I believe I checked the numbers, they had 5 programs that got to the 3rd round of the playoffs, but only 2 teams total got to the regional tournament. It was both the soccer teams, and I think that's where you see really the depth of Region 2 come into play is once you get into that 3rd round and you start dealing with the Woodlands and I'm just looking over the current structure right now, but you have programs like Cypress Ranch and Vandegrift, Klein ISD. I mean, that's where you begin to feel a little bit more of the resistance that people might not recognize locally just because it's not as pressing right now.
But looking at it now, I mean, their by-district rounds for Capel are going to be really tough.
It's changed much. It's changed for Capel. I mean, Capel was kind of in that position last year where they won, were finished 2nd in most of those sports out of 9-6A. So you were looking at getting the 4 seed out of
Naaman
the Garland,
something like that. Yeah,
and a lot of success there. So getting out of the 1st round wasn't the issue for them, but it was for a program that was that well-rounded. They still maybe left a little bit of meat on the bone from an expectation standpoint because Region 2 does have quite a bit of strength. You might not notice it in the 1st round or the 2nd round, but once you get into the 3rd round and you start dealing with some of the schools that are a bit further south of here, it'll creep up on you in a hurry. And I was looking just through the Lone Star Cup standings just to begin with, just to kind of see where how the upcoming Region 2 kind of where the balance lied. And of the top 16 programs in Class 6A in the Lone Star Cup standings, 6 of them are going to be in Region 2 this coming school year. That's the most of all 4 regions within that top 16. That doesn't even include Prosper, which was
number 1 in 5A.
Yeah, number 1 in 5A. So you still have, between you're getting Allen, you're getting Prosper, you already have the Woodlands, you're getting Cypress Ranch, Vandegrift, Saxe was in that mix too, Klein. So you still do have some pretty well-rounded athletics programs for sure in Region 2.
Yeah, and even the Central Texas teams that some people overlook, Pflugerville, Round Rock, those programs
in the right sport. they'll
Saxe's very aware of Pflugerville.
Yes,
in football.
And even over in, even though Allen and PISD departed Region 1 and 6A, Region 1 was just such a bear, especially in the DFW area with all the strength there. And looking at the current Region 1 alignment in 6A, it really does feel like a lot of the power has kind of been consolidated to, districts 5, 6, and 7. The old, what used to be the Allen Plano district in 6A, now that is where the Louisville ISD schools and Capel reside in 6A. Their by-district draw includes, Denton Geyer, Keller ISD, Northwest ISD, South Lake Carroll, so you're going to get plenty of competitive matchups there. And then you have District 7 6A, which depending on the sport, can be just an absolute bear with, Cedar Hill, DeSoto, Grand Prairie ISD, Mansfield ISD, because you did have a couple of those Mansfield schools make the jump up to Class 6A, as well as, Waxahachie. I'm fascinated just to kind of see from that aspect how a team team like like Keller does, because Keller used to be in District 3, a bit further out, west, and you would and they had a great athletics year. I believe they finished top 5 in the Lone Star Cup voting, but they they're going to be a lot of those teams that were a bit more central to DFW. They would see those teams in like the 4th round of the playoffs, whereas now you're going to get a lot of those first round, second round for them. So I'm curious to see if that kind of changes their prospects at all. How about let's see, looking at Class 5A, areas that you two are a bit more familiar with. Let's look at Region 2. With you've got a couple Mesquite schools out there. All the Frisco schools are there. What are y'all's initial impressions on what kind of the impact that Region 2 is going to have in 5A?
Now we're looking at just the non-football district?
Yeah, not so much
They
football.
don't have to play the Mansfield teams in the regional tournament. Mansfield, Legacy, and Timberview, they're in Region 1, District 5, 5A, and then Mansfield Lake Ridge, who's been a problem for many of the Frisco and Prosper teams over the years. They moved to 6A, so they don't have to deal with them in the regional tournament now. Their by-district round, I think, gets a little easier. I mean, you still have McKinney North in there, but you have Princeton, a team that just moved up to 5A. They were 4A last year. Don't know too much about Denison, but I know they're good at football, but it doesn't matter for this case. But Lovejoy is going to be an interesting by-district matchup. Lovejoy is good at pretty much everything. There, you can kind of compare them to Prosper. They they have a few of their sports where they're really, really dominant at, like volleyball, where they're a state title contender every year. So it'll be interesting to see, like a Lovejoy Lone Star, Lovejoy Wakeland, first round matchup in a lot of sports.
Well, and if I can make anybody else mad, looking ahead to that second round matchup, if you can get through the by-district round, who scares you outside of Highland Park?
That's fair. Look at Districts 11 and 12.
That's the Carrolltons and the rest of the Dallas schools who,
And again, every sport's different, and you're going to run into different teams that are going to give you a battle. But just across the board, Highland Park is always going to jump out at you for the most part. But if you can get past that first round, you got to feel really good about the opportunity to advance further.
Like, think about baseball. Because a lot of those teams, no knock on the Dallas schools, but they're not traditionally good at baseball or softball. That's an easy ride, 2 rounds deep in the playoffs just like that. If you can get by a Lovejoy or a North or Wiley East in the first round.
And some of the Carrollton schools have pretty good baseball tradition.
They used to, though.
Yeah, and whatnot.
They've fallen on hard times recently. But I mean, for Mesquite Poteet and West Mesquite, I mean, it's an entirely different outlook in that portion of the region.
It really is. And you look, they're no stranger to some of those East Texas schools, but there is a lot. There's been a lot of changes out there in the way that the makeup is. They're used to running into that Frisco district in the second round, which has given them fits in a lot of sports because they've had a lot of really good teams that just ran up against better competition. Some really good soccer teams that just run into that, those Frisco ISD juggernauts that are Prosper, for instance, in the last couple of years.
Like West Mesquite has had to play Prosper in the second round 2 years in a row in girls soccer. So. And then West Mesquite, Little Elm boys basketball, and stuff like that.
And it's really hard for us to gauge. I mean, I know 2 years ago I had a stat where when 15-6A played 16-6A, they were 26-6 in the first round.
Wow.
And I mean, they were just dominant. But then you look at a year like this year, well, those East Texas schools were stronger, especially late in the year in soccer, in softball, and baseball.
Basketball, they were solid too.
I mean, it's across the board, and it's really hard for us to gauge because we don't get to see them on a regular basis. We don't read about them on a regular basis. But you got some name programs over there. Texas High is there. Lufkin is there. John Tyler dropping down from 6A.
That's right.
Is in that region. Ennis is generally strong. Of course, Corsicana in several sports. So it's going to be interesting to play out. We're going to have to take this on a sport-by-sport basis, but it is a different dynamic in what they're going to see.
Over in, and then just to round this out with a quick look at Region 1 in 5A, where Lake Dallas, the Colony, Little Elm reside. Brian, you cover Little Elm, I cover Lake Dallas. I think the first thing that jumped out to me as far as their change from Region 2 to Region 1 is when it comes to by-district competition, you're going to have to, I think the top 2 seeds in are paramount, because if you look at District 7, 5A, and kind of where it does look, at least at the surface, like it could be a fairly top-heavy district.
For sure.
With Grapevine and Colleyville Heritage. Grapevine at least is a program that Lake Dallas is plenty familiar with. They shared a district with them a couple years ago. As same for Birdville, who's also in that 7, 5A district. But with Grapevine and Colleyville, you're talking about 2 of the most well-rounded programs in the 5A classification. And if you're getting, it would seem to reason that obviously, things can change sport to sport, but it would seem to make sense that those two are probably going to be jockeying for the district championship, quite a bit throughout the course of the school year. And if you can get, one of those top 2 seeds and just kind of prolong that matchup against, Grapevine or Colleyville, it would definitely be to your benefit.
In the Lone Star Cup standings this last year in 5A, Grapevine finished 8th and Colleyville Heritage finished 10th.
Yeah.
Grapevine, I saw them play in soccer at the state tournament, state final against Wakeland. They're dominant in girls soccer.
They're good at everything.
Colleyville Heritage, their baseball team was phenomenal. Still will be next year. So, that'll be a big point of emphasis to avoid those 3 and 4 seeds if you're Little Elm or Lake Dallas or the Colony.
It'll be more preferable, I think, at the surface than than what they've had to worry about in these last couple of years with going up against Frisco ISD. Went and checked. Lake Dallas, Little Elm, and the Colony posted just a 13-17 record in bi-district competition against Frisco ISD these past 2 years. So obviously, you would hope for for brighter pastures in Region 1, but obviously with Grapevine and Colleyville, that is certainly no guarantee. One other thing about that region, kind of looking elsewhere, you mentioned the Mansfield schools and them making the shift from 2 to 1, and they were in such a that was such a strong district last year, that 10-5A district, where they were tethered to Lancaster and Waxahachie, Midlothian, the other 2 Mansfield schools that are now in 6A, Lake Ridge and Summit. I'm kind of anxious to see kind of how they fare now, kind of on their own, and a bit of a more preferable draw.
Timberview and Legacy are good at everything too, especially girls basketball and basketball in general. Timberview, I saw them just dismantle the Lone Star girls basketball team in the regional tournament. If they're in Region 1 and Lone Star's in Region 2 like it is this year, Lone Star is going to state, no doubt about it. But yeah, we'll see how that shakes out later with Little Elm and then facing potentially Timberview and Legacy in basketball later down the road.
Well, and real briefly, getting back just to Region 2 for a second, just football only, the landscape is completely different there, because then you have, in that little regional, you have the Frisco schools, but then they match up with with Legacy, with Timberview, with Highland Park, with Lancaster in the first round. And on the other side, you have the Poteet and West Mesquite, John Tyler, who's going to have a very good team this year. You got Lufkin, who's a traditional power, and College Station, a young school that's really kind of come up quickly in there in the last 5 years.
And they were in the state championship game 2 years ago.
Yeah. So you look at those 4 districts right there packed in the football only.
Yeah,
granted,
for sure.
But there's a lot of very good teams in that little sub-regional.
Devin, who's making the playoffs in District 7-5A Division 1 football?
You put me on the spot. I will say I'm not going to homer it. No, Poteet, West Mesquite, John Tyler, and. Sorry, Kendrick. Wiley East.
Kendrick's going to hate you for saying
I know.
That's a tough district.
I'm on a roll today. So.
I've never really even paid attention to that 7-5A, so I had to ask. I was like, that's a pretty tough district.
No, I would take Wiley East out and put Texas High in. So, how the order goes, I couldn't tell you.
Just don't ask me to predict the playoff for District 5A. Not yet. Not yet, at least.
Not yet. That's for a later podcast.
Let's see. So I guess that's a look at that's some regional talk. Obviously we focus a ton on these schools, these districts, but obviously once they get to the postseason, just to give you an idea of kind of what the playoff landscape looks like in the respective regions that we cover, we're going to shift gears and talk some state 7-on-7 because that's happening this week, and we will give you just a quick primer on what to expect out of state 7-on-7 after a word from this sponsor. Today's Student Athlete Spotlight is brought to you by Bavarian Grill, authentic Bavarian food and beer garden. Listed by the Zagat survey as the highest rated German restaurant in Texas for 12 years in a row. 12 years! That's 3 presidential terms. You can enjoy traditional and authentic spring favorites now, everything from appetizers like slow roasted ham hock and potato pancakes to entrees like bratwurst or breaded schnitzel. Bring your whole family for lunch and dinner. They are open Tuesday through Saturday, located off Parker and Highway 75 in Plano. Bavarian Grill. And now, let's get back to the podcast. And let's pick things up with a look at some state 7-on-7. It is that time of year. We've got the action. I believe the Division II tournament starts later today down in College Station out at Veterans Park and Athletic Complex. Division I gets going tomorrow. But just wanted to give you all just a quick primer on just as far as local teams go, what we have down at the state 7-on-7 tournament. Out in College Station, we have, let's see, by my count, we have 11 teams from our markets competing at state 7-on-7. In no particular order, in Division I, there is Prestonwood Christian, Capel, Plano East, Little Elm, Hebron, Saxe, Poteet, and Horn out of Mesquite ISD, and Lovejoy. And then Division II, we got Salina and Sunnyvale. I'm not really sure even where to start with this. I mean, we could start with, well, let's look at our Salina. Salina is kind of the it program when it comes to 7-on-7. I mean, if you're going to just kind of make a, just a power rankings all time on which programs have done the most with their respective 7-on-7 campaigns, you'd be hard pressed to look anywhere else in Salina for that top spot.
Since 7-on-7 began in the 90s, they've won 4 state championships. One in 2000 before they even split up, into 2 or 3 divisions. So they were, beating the 5A teams at the time. You look at, other teams like Graham that have won 3 state titles in the last 3 years in Division II. I believe they're in the same pool. Salina, no, they're in the pool next to them. So they'll have to get through Graham if they can possibly get out of their pool with Glen Rose, Mejia, and Worthing, a team out of Houston. But yeah, no, Salina, they're locked and loaded. It's, you can almost guarantee every year that they're going to make the state tournament. And I had a good conversation with Coach Elliott last week about it, and he goes, a lot of teams, get mad at us because we don't run what we run in football.
Yeah.
He's like, we'll run in 7-on-7. We want to win in Salina. They built this winning tradition in Salina over the years, and in the fall and I guess in the summer over the past few decades, and they do what they got to do to win.
That's funny because I've 7-on-7 just fascinates me just because of just the different, the level of, how much some programs treat it versus how some other programs treat it. And then a lot of teams will do the exact opposite of that, and they will run the same kind of, pass catch concepts that they would on Friday nights and try to, I guess, use it as a chance to really hone as much of their offense as they can, as best as you can under 7-on-7. But then you have a program like Salina which says, you know what, nah, we're just gonna do what we can to get that W.
Yeah, and Coach Elliott tells me, he's like, man, this isn't football. There's no big lineman. Speaking from a former lineman himself at TCU, so he's a little favoritism there. But yeah, he says it's not football, so they're not going to play football.
I mean, he's right. You can try to put as much of a football spin to it as possible and try to have it serve as much application for the fall as you can, but you can only go so far just because of the rules, and like you said, no linemen and whatnot. You can't, the quarterbacks are stuck in the pocket. So it's, like I said, it's just simply one school of thought versus another, and it's tough to argue with the results when you look at what Salina's been able to accomplish.
It's working, and it's building a winning culture throughout the offseason, so to speak. So why not keep doing it?
And the kids are still getting to compete, which I think every coach will tell you, almost from one to another. That's probably the closest thing you can get to a consensus when it comes to 7-on-7. It's just another way to get the kids to compete.
Well, and just to build some momentum. Like when you take Sunnyvale into account. Sunnyvale had another great season last year, but they had a very hard time throwing the ball. And again, there's no correlation between what happens now and what happens, in August and September. But this is a pass-oriented game, and so just by kind of developing some camaraderie, developing some chemistry between quarterback, wide receivers, just in that offense, I think that's a positive step that Sunnyvale's having made the state tournament. They can kind of point to that and say, hey, look, we're going to build from that once we get to the workouts in August.
And it's also pivotal, I think, if you're breaking in a first-year quarterback, if you're one of those programs that graduated, we have teams like Prestonwood, like Capel, like Hebron, Saxe, for example. They graduated. All of them graduated Division I quarterbacks, and if you can get a chance to, the more chemistry you can use to develop between your quarterback and your receivers, especially if that quarterback is going to be entering their first year as a varsity starter, to do so say what you will about 7-on-7, it's still a high stakes competitive atmosphere. So just to give them a chance to kind of develop that that togetherness and build that bond under that kind of pretense. I think that's something that could definitely pay dividends down the road for sure.
Coach Elliott was also telling me, he was like, yeah, we've had years where we've done terrible in 7-on-7 and gone on to win state and football and vice versa. But just looking at some research, they they won it all in 07 in both 7-on-7 and in regular football.
That's the best of both worlds.
Yeah, and in 2000. So I guess it correlates a little bit, So might as well go all out in 7-on-7 if it helps,
Talent is talent, though. It's going to win. It's going to win in the summer, and it's going to win in the fall a lot of time. Not always, but a lot of times.
The Salina, just a quick bullet points. This is their 17th overall appearance at state 7-on-7. Their 12th consecutive, as you mentioned, that they've won it 4 years: 2000, 07, 09, and 2012. That's the most all time. Just for context's sake, only 4 programs in the state have won multiple state 7-on-7 championships. So Salina is just in some rarefied air there with 4 of them. You mentioned Graham has 3, and then there's a couple. Lake Travis and Baytown Lee each have 2 apiece. So it's what Salina has done historically is pretty hard to, to replicate. And I mean, you look at, every year they seem to, at least get to like the quarterfinals or at least win some game in their, whether it's the championship bracket or the consolation bracket. They always seem to have a productive showing there. As far as a program like, let's look at a couple of these first-time programs that are going to be making the trip down there. I mean, you guys have a couple of those with Little Elm, Saxe, Sunnyvale. Just kind of what kind of expectations do you think those programs have being their first ever trip to this event?
Well, I brought up Sunnyvale just a minute ago. I think this is a matter of just kind of laying a foundation, and building momentum toward the fall. Saxe is an interesting case because Red Barron's the head coach over at Saxe for years. He'll be the first one to tell you I'm not real big on 7-on-7. In a lot of years they played in the little local league, but they weren't real big at these SQTs. They weren't real. They didn't even really try to qualify for state. They've kind of taken a different approach. You mentioned they're breaking in a new quarterback. Anthony Beltran, Xavier Foreman have both been getting snaps. They both got snaps in the spring. They've both been working out in 7-on-7. But this is the first year that they've really, they had a good effort. I guess 2 weeks prior to qualifying, and then they finished. They won at the Northwest State Qualifying Tournament on June 9th. They were actually in a primetime tournament, one of these specialized tournaments that pop up all over the place. During as 7-on-7 continues to grow. They took second last week. So, this is the first year that they've really kind of focused on 7-on-7, and it's paid off because this is the first year they've ever made it to the state tournament.
But with a Little Elm, Brian, obviously you've had your expectations are high for Little Elm come this fall, but just to see them, they were able to notch a milestone by going to state 7-on-7 for the very first time. It surely doesn't hurt the progress.
My expectations for Little Elm are always high. No, but this is interesting that they're succeeding in 7-on-7 because their 2 strengths, I think, are their offensive line and their defensive line. And Coach Kendrick Brown told me last month that he thinks their defensive line is going to be the strength of the team. And I thought that was interesting. They're doing so well in 7-on-7. But they also have a quarterback in Logan Kohler who's been a starter since his sophomore year. But they graduate their 2 stud running backs who they could have possibly used in 7-on-7 in different packages. And they also lose their best receiver who's going to Texas Tech. So it's like, who's stepping up? Well, they have a guy named Brandon Crossley who's going to be a defensive back, offensive specialist, kick return specialist, getting a bunch of Division I offers. So he's been balling out. As Kendrick Johnson likes to say, if you ball, you get the call. He's been doing just that. And they also have another guy named Will Harris who transferred from Hebron just before last season. He's a starter on the basketball team. He's a 6'5" receiver. So he's been doing well as well. So when you have those, the talent, and the experience, it's taking them a long way.
Well, and that's why it's so hard to forecast 7-on-7 success, because like you say, Little Elm has an established quarterback, but kind of some uncertainty around him, whereas Saxe does not have an established quarterback. People say it's so quarterback focused in 7-on-7, but if you have pieces around it as well, Saxe returns, Miles Nash, Derek Rose, Trent Dean, Cameron Cromer at wide receiver, Mikey Buchanan, Bryce Robinson on defense. Coach Behrens thinks that Braylon Brooks and PJ Barber could be his best set of defensive backs he's had since he's been at Saxe. So, it's even if you're breaking in a new quarterback, it's those skill positions are equally as important.
So better than the kid that's going to Penn State? I can't think of his name right now.
Best pair.
Oh,
and he was. And Isaiah Humphries is a safety, and he's arguably the best defensive back in Garland Dynasty history based on just high school performance. But he's talking about his 2 clever corners. He feels so good about them. Again, this is off-season talk, but he's just really, really excited about what these guys can do. Come fall.
One team that's at least going to be on my radar as far as the teams that I cover locally. I'm interested to see what Prestonwood Christian can do at this tournament. Prestonwood Christian, who they played, they qualified way back in the very first SQT, all the way like 2 months ago. The one out in Frisco that was like in the middle of April, like a month before the actual SQT season really began in earnest. And that's the only SQT that they did. So they just have those 4 games in Frisco as far as tournament games go. And they were dominant. They won all 4 games. They won by an average of about 24 points. But then since then they've done the weekly leagues that just about all schools do. They do a private school league on Mondays. They do a public school league with, I believe it was Capel, Richardson, Pierce, both of whom are qualified for state, as well as Highland Park. And despite Preston being a private school, they show well against the public schools. This is their their 3rd year going to state. And just the kind of the element of the unknown and seeing how they fare there, because Prestonwood does traditionally sport some pretty strong, players at the skill positions. They are going to be one short, and that is kind of an interesting subplot, just not just for Prestonwood, but just for for a small handful of teams, is how State 7-on-7 is going to conflict with the opening finals, the Nike Prospect Showcase that's going to be in Frisco Friday through Tuesday. Prestonwood's not going to have Austin Stogner, their star tight end, one of the top tight end recruits in the country, because he's going to be in Frisco, at this Prospect Showcase. As far as other markets within our area that are, could be affected by this. Hebron's best receiver, Trajan Bridges, both he and Austin Stogner committed to OU, by the way. But they are, on the invite list for the opening finals in Frisco. Then you also have schools like Lake Travis down in Austin. Their stud receiver Garrett Wilson, he's invited to this event. You've got, Bishop Dunn has 2 defensive backs that were invited to this. So you have, some pretty, so you could have some of, I think at least I counted 7 programs of the ones down in State 7-on-7 could be shorthanded because of it conflicting with this with this prospect showcase. So just be interesting to see if that pays any dividends, if there's any effect whatsoever with these teams being a little bit shorthanded. But
you just had to throw the OU thing in there.
I did. Boomer Sooner. You guys know how this goes, especially you, Devin.
Oh yeah.
So, did you guys have anything else you want to throw out for State 7-on-7, or will that just about do it?
Little M's going to win it all. So
there you go. You heard it here first. Sorry for the spoiler alert. No need to drive down to College Station if you were planning to, because Little M's already got it locked up.
No, I'm really to see how Horn factors in down there. I saw them last week at the Rowlett SQT where they qualified, and Jermaine Gibbons, their outstanding second-year quarterback. He just, again, it's 7-on-7. There's no pressure. It's very laid back there. But he just looked effortless back there, just picking apart the defense against Mansfield Timberview, which is obviously got incredible athletes over there. They've had their share of success. Yeah. But I was just really impressed with him last week. Asias Taylor, Reagan Nickerson is back, and they're younger guys. He was spreading the ball around. Horn graduated their top 3 receivers last year, and so Reagan Nickerson is really the only guy back with a lot of experience. But Nikowski Emery is back. He got into the action a little bit late in the season. But guys like Cameron Jackson, Jaden Givens, these younger guys that really were kind of impressive in this at the Rowlett event that I saw last week. So we'll see what they can do. They got Lake Dallas in their opener and pool play, as well as Austin Bowie and Cy-Fair. So we'll see. But Horn, it wouldn't surprise me if they were able to make a little bit of a run.
I'm anxious to see what Plano East can do as well, just at least from I want to see how well that offense continues to gel, because as we mentioned, they have a lot of continuity on that side of the ball, especially, tailored to an environment like 7-on-7 where they have their starting quarterback, Brandon Mallory, and they have just about every receiving yard that the team picked up last year. So, and it's kind of materialized with when you look at what they've done with players like Jalen Anderson, who, is one of the best receivers in the area, and just a guy who, the only player, like in all the SQTs that I went out and shot photos for this summer, that was one of the only players who consistently just drew oohs and ahs from the spectators on the sideline, just because of just some of these spectacular catches. His catch radius is just off the charts, and he's a walking highlight reel when he's playing 7-on-7. Plus you got guys like Josh Allison, Braylon Henderson, Joseph Carter, a lot of continuity in that Plano East offense. Anxious to kind of see how they fare during their trip to State 7-on-7, and that will and obviously we will have coverage on all that stuff throughout the week as the tournament proceeds. For all that stuff, you can check it out at starlocalmedia.com. Otherwise, folks, I think that'll just about do it for this edition of the podcast. Devin, Brian, appreciate y'all for tagging along. We'll be back on Monday with another edition of the Star Local Media Sports Podcast. In the meantime, folks, y'all enjoy the rest of your week, and we will talk to y'all later.